Welcome everybody to Quick Hits with Roy, episode 4. We're here with Roy Bingham, the co-founder of BDSA. Big news around Roy. He has stepped down from his operational roles at the company and continues on as a director. Great news is Roy's going to have more time to do more Quick Hits with Roy, so we expect to see a little bit more of his face around here. Thanks for joining us again today, Roy.
Thanks for having me, George. Great to be here.
Awesome. So today we want to kind of drill down onto Oregon. It is a market that has had tremendous growth in 2020, with up 40%, I believe it was, Roy?
38%, I think.
And so it reached over $1 billion. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how much that market's grown in the last year?
Yeah, so as I said, about 38% growth to $1.11 billion. Fascinating, really, because they'd only grown at 20% the year before and 21% the year before that. So it looked like this was a market that had matured, and suddenly it took off again. And it took off in a very uneven sort of fashion. It was very much a month-to-month story and obviously very influenced by COVID. So we saw January and February continuing at that about 20% growth versus the prior year. March picked up to 30% growth. April, 40% growth versus the prior year. You're thinking, whoa, something's going on here. And then May was 80% higher than May of 2019.
That's huge.
It kind of calmed down and the growth was 30, 40% for each month for the rest of the year, but an extraordinary spike in May.
Let's talk a little bit about what categories have grown in the market. Certainly, we know that the Northwest tends to like flower. Concentrates are very popular. But why don't you break down some of the category growth for us?
Yeah, so you're right. Flower is about 44% of sales by December of 2020. Actually, it didn't grow all that much relative to the market. It grew at the same rate as the market, but there's dramatic growth here. It's about nearly 50% growth. Mm-hmm. Concentrates represent about 29% of the market by the end of the year. They'd gone up from 27% at the end of the prior year, so they actually outgrew the market. Concentrates did pretty well. Edibles are about 12% of the market and pretty much flat relative to the market, but grew nicely. And pre-rolled actually did a little bit better than average. They're up to about 9% of total sales.
That's interesting because, a lot of times as we see these markets come online, flower tends to be very popular out of the gate, and then consumers start becoming aware of concentrates as maybe a better buy for the dollar for the intended outcome. But, as the market really starts expanding, we get a larger swath of the population. Edibles have always done kind of well in the later stages of market growth. Is that unusual in Oregon?
No, they're actually slightly lower in Oregon at 12% than we would see in Washington State or California and Colorado, which is more like 15 or 16% of the market. So assuming consumers are similar across states, which generally they tend to be by categories, I'd expect edibles to continue to grow.
Great. There's some really interesting brands in the Oregon market. Why don't you tell us about some of the brands that are really making some big moves?
Yeah, so you mentioned edibles, and Wild is well known as the dominant or largest brand. Anyway, I wouldn't say necessarily dominant, but largest brand. Well, they didn't grow so rapidly last year. They grew 22%, which is significant, but they've got a number of other companies like Gron who are coming up behind them, and they grew at 64%. In ingestibles, there are 167 brands in Oregon, so it's a pretty active environment now. In flower, you've got 435 brands, but there's no real major dominant brand. But all of the leading brands, of course, did well in this high growth environment. And then in concentrates, you've got 250 brands. And in fact, Buddies grew really well last year. They grew by about 50%, and they took over the number one position, which had been held by Select Oil for quite a considerable period of time.
Yeah, I think that speaks to some of these really hometown favorite brands. And you look at what happened in the specialty beer markets where people tend to want to buy local brands. As we're starting to see some of these larger national brands, Wild certainly is born and raised in Oregon, and I'm a big fan of anything Marionberry. being in the Pacific Northwest myself. But they've also been expanding very rapidly to a number of other states. So certainly that's going to stretch the resources. Companies like Select, again, being stretched into new markets, where some of the local brands, I think, are going to have an opportunity to really create a fan base and consumer engagement in those markets. Anything else that you really think is interesting in Oregon? Do we expect to see continued growth?
Oh, yes. Although the question is, will it continue at the same rate that it happened in 2020? I doubt that is likely. I don't suppose we'll see 38% growth. Remember, during this period of time, Oregon prices or flower prices had crashed. There'd been oversupply on the market. In about May of 2018, that turned around and prices started to increase. And through 2020, we saw a significant increase in flower prices from the lowest in the nation, about $3.50 a gram, to about $5.40 a gram by the end of last year. Still very reasonable compared to almost any other state. But I don't suppose we're going to see that drop in prices anymore. And it seems like we found a floor because the market grew significantly as prices rose.
And that's really the fundamentals of how free markets are supposed to work, right? Oregon went and did something that everybody kind of went into a state of panic about, where they issued a massive amount of additional cultivator licenses that drove that price down because there was an oversupply. I mean, I heard people saying that they were buying pounds of weed for $50 and bringing them to Idaho. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But at some point, then the market should correct itself and the supply should stabilize, and it should reach some type of stasis as far as the supply and demand, stabilize the prices. And it's great to see that happened. I mean, Oklahoma is also obviously another market where we saw a completely different setup in the licensing process, with over 10,000 licenses. I don't know, the number was 14,000, 12,000. But at some point, Oklahoma is going to certainly stabilize, and there will be companies that survive and companies that are able to make I think a consistent profit and living with those businesses. So, Roy, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. We look forward to getting some more time to see you. Maybe we can even get a few rounds of golf in. We are excited to bring our MJ Unpacked brand slam to the Oregon market in the coming months. Stay tuned and sign up for MJ Brand Insights. Roy, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, George. It's always great to work with you and with MJ Unpacked. A real pleasure.
Thank you.